today is we're going to be tying like an SF CLOUSER variation that I tie up using for bass, a lot of times in our saltwater stuff, for our spotted bay bass, calico bass. You can use it for pike, pretty much anything that feeds on bait fish. So I have a 1/0 TP 650. It's a 26-degree bend hook from Arex, and this is a 1/0. The thread I'm going to be using is going to be a mono thread right here, because I just like having that invisibility when I tie in materials. I don't have to add in or color anything. I'm going to take a little bit of super glue right here for the base, because the key on a good CLOUSER minnow is going to be how good your base is. And that'll help keep material from wrapping around, or not wrapping around, I should say, from rolling around and your eyes moving. Extra materials, whenever you're using lighter threads, you can just break it off. Don't need to bring the scissors up or anything else like that and waste extra time. So with this guy, what I like using is I like using these pseudo eyes, these brass pseudo eyes. The reason is because I like actually having the pupils and an actual eye on them right here. It just gives me more confidence when I'm tying this fly. You can tie it with lead eyes or non-eyeball ones, but I just like ones with eyeballs. One of the things I like doing here is where I tie in my materials. A lot of people crowd their eyes on CLOUSER minnows. I take whatever size dumbbell I'm using and putting it right along, and not gluing myself to the hook, but right where this bend is going to be. Sometimes that'll be the eye hook with this bend, with this 26-degree bend in the hook. I'll actually put that eyeball right up against there, and that's where I'm going to tie in my eyes. So you can see I moved that thread back to there. Then I'm going to put in my eyes right there and do 1, 2 wraps over, 2 X wraps over that way. So I'm tying this in. I'm doing 1, 2, 1, 2. It just kind of keeps it uniform. You don't want to do too many on one side, because that'll get your eyes on this to turn one way or another. So we'll do more X wraps. Now I'll do kind of a lashing. I'll come up over the eyes, under the hook, over the eyes, under the hook. Kind of like a square lashing, and then I'm going to go around in between the eyes and the hooks a couple of times. Double check. You can already see that's starting to get pretty locked on there. To make sure this is double, extra, triple locked down, I'm going to do a couple of wraps on the base. Do a few X wraps over, a few more X wraps over, wrap down and create more of a base. This makes these things pretty much bulletproof. I always like to say a few things will last the nuclear holocaust. Cockroaches, and where these eyes are on my CLOUSER minnows. They're not going anywhere. Make sure it's not going anywhere. A little bit of super glue goes a long way. Just like that. If the super glue doesn't move around a lot, you can just give it a little flick like that off the end of the hook, and that'll move that glue around. You can do the same thing with any of your epoxies too. It'll help get that glue and everything else moving faster and quicker around there, so you don't have to wait as long. Do some more X wraps over that. And there we go. Those are not going anywhere anytime soon. So now I'm going to tie in. This is going to be a chartreuse and white. I'm going to tie in with the SF UV in white. So this guy here, I'm actually going to do, it's not enough, I'm going to take a little bit more. You can always trim away this material. Unlike your fake materials or your natural materials like bucktail, once you've tied it in, you can't trim it. So don't be afraid to put a little bit more than what you think you need. I'm going to double this over and actually cut it in half. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to kind of taper these materials by pulling out the ends of these, pretty much forming a taper. Extend that back side out a little bit more in the top. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to tie this in at about a 60-40 right here on that. So you can see I'm going to tie it in with my materials like this. So when I tie it in, it's going to have an automatic taper into that body. So I'm going to bring that thread forward right up against the eye of my hook, or the brass eyes right there, and do that 60-40. So I'm going to do one light wrap, do a second one, and kind of pull it back and see where you're at. I'm about there. I'm going to give a little bit of a tug so I can get a little bit more towards the back. Just like that. There we go. You wrap a couple times back towards the bend of the hook. Bring this material back. And tie it in right there. So pretty much this creates an automatic, a little bit of a taper to it. I'll have to do some trimming on it. And I'm going to keep on going with the material back until it's starting to point down just a little bit. Right about there. You can see how that material is now starting to point down on that. The reason I'm doing that is to get that material in line with my hook. And then the other reason is it brings it farther back on the shank of my hook. And it helps it from fouling. So what I'm going to do to keep those slides, because I don't want them up like this, I'm actually going to wrap underneath that material. I'll do that once. It looks like I'm going to have to do it a second time to help prop that material up a little bit more with the SF. And there we go. And then tie forward. Just like that. I already have some material. I will do some trimming to clean that guy out, but we won't do that till later. So the next part on this is I'm going to take the crystal flash right here in UV. I'm going to take 3 to 4 strands of it. I tend to like 4 strands because I'm going to actually use this as part of some of my flash here in a little bit. Pull that out. Get all 4 of those pieces evened out. And that goes right up against my brass eye and tie that in. Bring that all the way back. I'm going to do one more wrap underneath to make sure all that material is flared up. There we go. Now I'm actually going to bring my thread in front of the pseudo eyes. Whoop, did I lose one? I did lose one. No problem if you do. Just tie that in. This isn't going to affect, body doesn't need to be super thin on this. It can be a little thick here. But I do want to keep kind of an even number on that. And now I'm going to take my crystal flash and just start wrapping it over my thread wraps going forward. Go. Keep on wrapping it forward. If they're split out like this, it's not a big deal at all. Just keep wrapping. It'll pretty much cover it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Now, I'm actually going to do an X wrap with this material over my eyes. So I come up over, boom on one side, do a wrap on that. Do one more here. Then we'll do another one, just kind of X-wrapping that up and over. Do a couple wraps forward. Bring that hook back around and tie in that material. 1, 2, 3. Now this is the reason why I use 4 pieces on this one. I'm going to kind of split these guys up, pull them back so they're on either side of my hook right there. So I don't have to worry about trying to fuss with getting them on either side later on. And then go over it and wrap over the hook just like that. Now you have your first little layer of flash. I'm going to come in now with my UV polar chenille right here. If you notice, the polar chenille is almost like a hackle, where one point will face down and then another side of it will be your upturned side. I tend to like tying with everything pointing down. That way the material stays out, it'll flare out a little bit more, and it's easier to tie in for me. So I'm going to bring this up over the top. Just start wrapping this in. I'll wrap this back to about a third of the way back from the eyes to the bend of my hook, because I'd want to keep a little bit of this flash to show underneath this. And then wrap forward, locking in that material. Now I'm going to take and wrap this UV polar chenille over the top and around. I'm going to do about 4 to 6 wraps. 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to do one more. 6. Just like that. So it's going to add a little bit of volume, but you can still see that little bit of UV flash underneath that too. Then I'm going to take my thread, and moving it back and forth is going to get through that material better, so I don't get any of those fibers locked underneath my thread. So they're all out and looking really nice and proud. You do about 3 of those wraps through there. One thing I like to do to make sure I don't cut my thread is I'll grab whatever material it is, I'll take my finger and press against the thread and move it away from my material that I'm cutting. That way I'm not cutting my material on accident. Everybody's done that a couple of times. I've done that more than a few thousand times. So when I bring this over here, I'll put my finger, move the thread away, and chop. And that way, hopefully no headaches. Palmer that back, and bring it over. Just a couple more wraps, and there we go with the body material right there. So next I'm going to tie in a couple more flashes on here. You can tie as much or as little flash as you want. I want this guy to pop a little bit. So I'm going to use 2 pieces of crystal flash right here. And what I'm going to do here is make sure I'm not getting material underneath there. Is I'm going to take this and actually wrap it around. So I've got my thread here. I'm going to put this in front of my thread wraps around the eye of the hook, just like that. What that does is it locks everything into place, or it goes around to either side, and then I use my fingers right there to kind of split it open. So when I tie it in, I have my thread right there. It's easy just to lock that down in place. 1, 2, and 3 wraps. Just like that. Then to add a little bit more depth into this, I'm going to grab some lateral scale. This is the, I believe this is the 1/69th inch. Yes. I'm just going to grab 2 of those guys. Trim that up nice and tight. And do the same exact thing. Go around the hook. Make sure they're kind of even. Tie those in. I'm actually going to tie that in because those will automatically spread. Whoop, I tied those a little too tight. I'm going to tie those in and bring it back over the top too. Just do a quick little wrap right there. Now I'm going to grab some chartreuse SF. Take a little bit out there. What I like doing ahead of time is, if I'm unsure on what size I want to use, because I'm going to fold this in half, I'm just going to take this and go, is this how much I like? Is this how much material I want? If it's not, go back for a little bit more. So it's kind of just like pre-checking. And this one I'm not going to double over on that and cut it into quarters. On that, I'm going to leave this whole length because this is going to be the longer tail that's going to be sticking further back behind this hook. Okay, let's just double check to make sure we're looking good here. Yep. I'm going to split the material. Just like this. So it goes on either side of the hook. Now do 1 and 2 wraps. Then I'm going to bring that material back around so it's sitting on top and not migrating over around. And then I'm going to wrap over the eyes once and twice. Get material stuck in my bobbin. Get some of that off of there. There we go. Tie it in again, and now I'm going to just bring that material back over. And now instead of kind of splitting it, I'm just going to let the hook point kind of do that split for me. And watch out for that hook point. It's not very fun. And then I'm going to do another X wrap over the top of that. And wrap that in right there. So now I've got a good chunk of that fly done. What I like doing right here is I'll do a little half hitch just to lock this in place. The reason being is sometimes I'll take this fly out and make sure all the material's laying down good and make sure that fly is starting to look really good right there. And it is. I'm liking what I'm seeing. There we go. Now the reason why I tied this material so far back, because this is the part we're going to add some bucktail into this. So this I'm going to be using the bucktail. Everybody uses this part of the bucktail, you know, for over the top or underneath is the belly. Nobody likes using this back stuff. I have no clue why, because that is some of the coolest coloring in our fly fishing realm here. So I'm actually going to take that material and take a little bit of it. You don't need a ton. And trim that back. Kind of clean up that material. So I come in here to my materials. Make sure I pick out all the loose little pieces. What I'm going to do here is trim that up so I pretty much have a nice, clean, straight work surface off of there. Just like that. Make sure I get all those extra materials. Because tying this in, ideally, when I'm going to tie this guy in, I'll be able to tie it directly in without having to trim anything at all. So I'm going to do here, with this material here, with bucktail, when you're tying it in, you'll use a lot of pressure when tying in bucktail at times. And that material will want to migrate around your hook. So if you're bringing your thread towards you and away like that, that material is going to migrate around the hook towards or going away from you. So you don't want to tie this material up top right here. On this, you actually want to tie the material towards you on this side of the hook, towards the side of the hook that you're on. And that'll help create that migration so it doesn't migrate around as far. When it migrates, now it'll end up on the top of the hook instead of going on the other side. So I'll bring that material up and around, facing down on that one. I'm going to do 1 Make sure I'm not catching any materials. 1 and 2 light wraps. You can see how it's already starting to migrate around. Now I'm going to pull that bucktail back. There you go. Keep pulling it back. Right to about there. And then 1, 2 wraps more. You'll do a third wrap because it's not wanting to sit down nice. Then what I'm going to do, what I can also do to help keep this material from migrating around the hook, is I can actually grab it with both my fingers, just like this, and tighten down. And that'll help keep the fly from those materials from migrating around. 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. You can see how that's kind of flaring out, creating a little bit more body to that fly. Now, I'm just going to trim off just that little bit of excess. I didn't do a good enough job on that guy. But you don't have to trim too much. And don't make it a square point on this one. You want to have a taper to it so it's easier to tie off. Now, to make sure this stuff, the bucktail, doesn't go anywhere at all, take a little bit of super glue and hit that bucktail with it. Let me give it a couple little flicks like that so that super glue penetrates into the bucktail, and then I'll just start wrapping forward. Not super tight, because I'm just kind of wrapping over the material and hiding it down. Now, once I've kind of hidden it down, now I'm going to start adding more pressure on it. Whoop. And that's what happens when you're tying in the same spot too much. You end up breaking your thread, especially with this mono thread. There we go. There we go. Now let's clean up the little extras here, because I don't want to cut my material. I'm going to use my finger in between there. Boom. And thankfully it saved a day. I'm going to wrap back. So another thing I like to do with bucktail is when you tie it in like this, if you want it to flare out more, you put more pressure up at the front or way up here where you're tying in back here. If you want to lay down more, then you use less pressure tying back, and that'll lay that material down more. I want to have a little bit of flare on there. It's almost perfect. So I'm not going to add any more wraps back or any more wraps forward. I'm just going to kind of clean up this head right here. Just like that. And then come over here and find my whip finish tool. And do a quick whip finish. There we go. Whoop, got one piece stuck in there. Just use the whip finish tool to get out there. And because I want to be Captain Overkill, I'll do one more whip finish. Okay. All right. So now we kind of have the general basic of that fly going right here. Since I am going to be waiting for that glue to dry up, what I am going to do is I'm going to kind of trim this body away. So I can see right back here, it's kind of like the end of where my white material is. I'm just going to take a little bit further beyond that and just cut that off. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and become a hairstylist and just kind of slowly taper that body down now. That's what I really like about this SF blend. I can very quickly and easily get a taper to that fly right here. I'm going to do the same thing, bring this underneath. Try not to cut your flash out. It's not a big deal if you do. You can move that around. But just kind of taper that back material a little bit more. And there we kind of have a body finished right there of one of these clousers. Final thing I'm going to do here is I want to add a little bit more pop to this fly. I'm going to actually come underneath. I'm going to create a little kind of hot spot underneath so that the fish can kind of see this. So I'm going to take the Solarez bone dry right here. This should be the translucent orange. It's a little bit cooler today. I'm just going to put this right underneath the throat and a little bit right under there. Perfect. It creates a little hot spot right there. And then I'm going to hit this with the UV light. It's not much, but I kind of like it. Gives a little bit of pop underneath. You can see there's a bunch of UV material. You can see how that top pops a lot. This just helps the underneath belly pop a little bit more. And then I'll come back and I'll grab our original bone dry and cover over that eye, or cover over all those threads where the bucktail is at. There we go. And then I'll also, to add a little bit extra durability, I'm going to throw a little bit over that UV that I just put down, just because it just adds another coat over that so it doesn't get damaged. Make sure that material looks good. If I want this to be a little bit narrow and not flaring out as much, I can actually grab that bucktail and hit it with the UV light, and that'll kind of help force it back a little bit. There we go. And beauty. There's kind of your kind of SF Clouser with a little bit of bucktail in there. Just like that. Fish is really good. You can fish it all over the place. Catches a ton of fish and is super durable.